Hello, my name is Brian. I'm going to be walking through this a quick build of the S400. I'll have the components listed down below. I am the owner of Salvo Studios. I have built the S400. This is the S401. The S700 is going to be coming in the next few months, but I wanted to see if I could get a video done real quick that will show users how the installation is done with the S401. The components that I have, I said I'll be listing. All of this that you see in front of you is stock unless it comes with the case, unless I mention otherwise. The components, the motherboard, the power supply, the custom cables I'll be using for the power supply, the hard drives, SSDs, video card, all components are my own and do not come with it. What you see in front of you right now is primarily what comes with it: the panels, the chassis, the accessories to install all the components. But the components themselves will have to be purchased separately. If you have a question about what's compatible, don't hesitate to contact me. You can go to my website and there's a contact link at the top, and just shoot me a message and I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. Right now what I've done is I've already installed the first step to save some time. Are the fans. There's 3 60mm fans that can be installed, one at the bottom and 2 at the top. I refer to this as the bottom and that as the top right now because it's easy just to reference it that way. But the video card, the GPU, is located on this end and the main board on that end, with the power supply in the back right as you see it. But the case can actually be oriented such that the near side can be the bottom, the far side can be the bottom, or it can be laid in a horizontal orientation just like it sits right now. Once everything is assembled, you would use the included rubber feet to put on the back of the solid panel that would cover, for example, the main board access hole. And then it would prevent it from sliding around and scratching anything that you might set it on, like a glass table. So let's get started. Step 1's already done with the fans installed. Step 2 is going to be installing the main board. Don't forget your I/O shield. So I'm going to go ahead and install that first so I don't forget it. And then we'll go ahead and get this main board installed. Now the main board I'm using is actually the ASRock B350 ITX main board, and a 2700X R7 Ryzen AMD. I've got on this main board, I've got a Cryorig C7 copper with the Noctua A9 92mm fan. There's an adapter I purchased online to allow you to remove the C7 fan and install the Noctua, which is good for noise. I don't think it performs any better, to be honest. I'm not even sure the copper performs better than the aluminum. But I want to test this again once I get the rig finally set up. But the noise is definitely better with this fan. So that's what I'm running with inside this case. Now the screws you'll be using are number 1 screws. They're all 632s. All these baggies will be labeled. You'll need 4 of these screws. And I typically have to put a little bit of pressure on the main board to get it to sit over the standoffs, but that's normal. If you ever wonder too, this is a great tip. If you're having a hard time getting the screws to go in, always back it out until you hear a click, and then you know the threads are lined up. Like that. It saved me several times from having to accidentally strip some standoffs or something that aren't that easily replaced. You have to be very gentle with some of these threads on these chassis, because you don't want to strip them out there. I mean, the whole chassis would have to be replaced in some cases. You also don't want to torque them down too hard. These 632 threads are very coarse, so a quarter of a turn is a considerable amount of pressure that you'll be adding once it's tight. So if you go an extra quarter turn, that's significant. I like to tuck that fan power cable right underneath that fan, reduce any kind of interference. So the motherboard's installed. I'm going to go ahead and plug this PCIe adapter in so that I don't worry about messing that up. The next step's going to be getting the power supply installed, but I'm going to move the case first so you can see what I'm doing with the power supply outside of the case. So I'm using a Corsair SF600, and I've got the bracket right here. Now it's going to be installed like this with these two notches lining up to the two bottom holes. And when I say the bottom holes, they're the bottom in reference to the intake of the power supply. If your intake were on the opposite side, say it was on this side, you'd want to make sure just that that intake is facing up when you mount this, okay? The other hint I would have, since these are #1 screws as well, is to screw one of these in just a little bit so that you don't have to screw both of them in while you hold that bracket. You can screw one of them in just a little. And then what you do is you get that bracket on one side. It's hooked on there. And all you have to do, it's easier if you have magnetic tools, but this seems to work. Now you have to do is get this side in. And once it's there, you just tighten it down. And you've got the mounting bracket installed onto your power supply. The next thing I'm going to recommend, we'll move the chassis back over, is before you mount the power supply actually inside the chassis, move everything out of this area, because these very top two holes here and here are going to be where the power supply is mounted from the back side of the chassis. It's going to sit right in this area. What you want to do is go ahead and plug your power in first, your extension cable for the inside. You're not going to be able to plug this in after you mount the power supply inside. There's no room to disconnect it. And the second thing is there's an anti-vibration pad I've installed underneath each one of these tabs. So angle the power supply in like this, and then you can make sure that you get it in place by pushing down. I want to make sure these fan connectors are out of the way. And with that, I can now go to the back side of the chassis and try to line up the holes to screw in from the other side. And they're nearly lined up. These are going to be #2 screws, in the bag that has a #2 on it, just like this. And what you want to do is just take these and put them like that. Like that. It's helpful, by the way, to have two different kinds of screwdrivers. One's a small jewelry type screwdriver. Those are good for these small screws, the thin heads. You don't want to strip the heads off of them by torquing them too much with the big screwdriver. And that is the power supply installed. Easy peasy so far. The next step is going to be any of your hard drives or SSDs, which will mount in the bottom in these holes here. The back side has a label for where they go. Throughout, you might want to do some cable management. I know this is going to be a little bit messy. I understand that, because I don't have the time to, while I'm making this video, to actually just go ahead and clean everything up. But I'll try to get a picture of everything cleaned up, posted. With the front power button, by the way, the two loose 1-pin connectors are the power LED, right? So the black one's going to be the negative, the red's going to be the positive for the LED. And then the two that are together, that's actually the switch. They're both black. It does not matter which one's plus or minus. It's just a switch. It closes when it's shut. Normally open, closes when it's shut. I think it goes right here and right here. I'm also going to go ahead and plug in these system fans. I've got an extension, and then I've also got a Y adapter, because this ASRock B350 motherboard has two system fan inputs or outputs on the main board itself, but I've got 3 fans, so I need to combine 2 of these, which are going to be the top 2 here. I just go ahead and plug these into this Y adapter here. Well, I've got a little bit of space. I could have done this before I did the power supply. And then it plugs in right here on this main board. Stuck it away. Okay, now, hard drives. I have 2 2.5-inch SSDs. They're SanDisk solid-state SSD pluses. I already have them actually configured a RAID 1 array, but I'm going to install them on this side, actually, underneath the PCI-e cable, because I just got an email from somebody who was worried about the tension that these may pose against the cable. If you look, let's angle this a little bit. If you look, this cable has pretty good flexibility. I don't like putting a lot of pressure on it, but these cables are pretty high quality. If you kind of bend it back towards itself here, try not to push right against the plastic part, but push from above, you know, and get that curve good right there. What you'll be able to do is put the disc in, and it will fit. This hole needs to line up with these holes. So let's see them fit in. Now, if you install on the bottom, if you install a 25, this is the only place you have an option of installing a 25 millimeter depth, 60 millimeter wide fan. You get the Noctua, you will not be able to use this 2.5 or this 2.5-inch drive bay. I didn't plan for the 25 millimeter deep fan to be used, and when I finally tested it inside the chassis of my final design, I realized that these holes will prevent a 2.5-inch drive from being used with that 25 millimeter deep fan. It will work with the 15 or less, but it will not work with the 25. Just a note. What I like to do is actually put these in here, kind of hold them loose, and then turn the case around and locate them on the back. I've laser etched labels on these, so where I'm going to be installing them is going to be an S3 and S4. This may be very difficult for my hands to avoid hitting the camera. So I'll start with S4, and holes are right there. There we go. And the screws you want to use are screw number 3. I found that twisting the top of these can get it open quite easily. There's 16 of these M3 screws that are designed to work with these 2.5-inch drives included, because you can have up to 4 of these drives installed. It's 2.5-inch drives inside one chassis. I do install the corners first, that way you know it's at least mostly square, and you don't have to keep holding it from the other side. Don't tighten it too tight. You don't want to strip your screws, your holes in your drives out. The second one holds right there, and there is no pressure on the PCI-e cable because I bent it a little bit out of the way to begin with. But we'll show you on the other side. Okay, with 2 of the screws in each drive, I'm now going to put the rest of the screws in their respective holes just tighten them up. Okay, both drives are mounted. Let's turn them around and have a look at the front. Now it's difficult to see, but with this PCI-e cable, there is no contact between those drives and the PCI-e cable, so you should have no concern about installing 2.5-inch drives right there. So, with the drives installed, the next step is going to be installing the GPU, but I want to go ahead and install some of these cables, even though the cable management is going to be awful. I'm going to start with the SATA cables. I have two locking cables. I'm just going to turn it up so that I can see in there. These are very stiff cables. I will be buying some custom cables since this is going to be my personal machine. Okay, the cables are installed. Let's see if I can't. I'm going to start with the power cables now. I bought special cables from Mod DIY. They're not exactly the cheapest source, may not even be the best, but I've done business with them before and I like them, so I will continue to do so. The specs on these cables I will put in the description. The length for this ASRock B350. Most main boards that have a similar layout, these length cables should be fine. I also have a Gigabyte B350 that the power connector is actually located above the CPU and heatsink on the left here, and these cables would not be long enough to reach. Just a note. So they will not work with every setup. I want to go CPU power, and I like to weave it. All this is going to be zip tied down. I've got zip tie mounts below. Again, cable management I will address later for the sake of just getting through the install process. So, now my SATA cables. I've got two special cables. I had Mod DIY give me these this 6-pin to two 4-pin molex connectors. And then if I ever decide to install 4 2.5-inch drives, I've got the option of adding these short Y adapters from molex to SATA. That'll keep my theory. It was supposed to keep my cables looking a little bit less messy. In reality, I'm not sure that this is the best idea, but it's certainly not the worst. So I want that underneath everything here. go ahead and install it. One there. Install one right here. Come on. There we go. It'll hide well underneath the PCIe cable. Now, what I want to do, I'm going to put this power cable underneath this 24 pin when I clean that up. I might have routed that wrong, but it doesn't matter for the time being. Next up is the GPU. Now, with the GPU, what you want to do is angle it so that the front bracket slides into the slot on the left. I'm going to, speaking of angling, angle this just a little bit. Sorry. So you can see where I'm going. Now angle it down because some cards are long enough that they actually need to clear on the front here. The Fury, the R9 Fury, for example, for one. And then what you want to do is once you get it inside, I know mine's still a little loose, but so you can see, this PCIe extender has this yellow tab on it. Make sure that it's slid to the right or you're not going to get your card in. Might end up breaking the extender. You line it up and you squeeze it in. You can lock it by pushing this back over to the right. Sometimes they can be a little finicky. Sometimes they don't go all the way over, but it is locked. And then the last thing for the GPU is going to be to install the two screws that hold the bracket in place. Going to be some more number ones. Now these are threaded, they're not standoffs, they're not inserts, so you need to be very gentle with these because if you strip these holes, it's going to be very difficult to find another way to fasten down your GPU. So just do not over tighten these. The GPU is installed. Now one thing you could have done that I failed to do would be to plug in the power before you screw it down, but thankfully I've got these short cables here and they just plug into the back. It's an 8 and then a 6 pin for this RX, this Vega, what is it, the WX 9100. So I'll plug in the 8 pin first, and then this is a 6+2. I'll do it in a second. That is tight. But it works. Wow, that is very tight. I may have to move that. But GPU is in. So with all the cables installed, and once you clean them up, the only thing left to do is to install, I should have done this before the GPU, is the USB. Every one of these comes with these blue USB cables, and what you'd be doing is connecting it into the adapter down here, routing it most likely behind the GPU, and up into the main board. In this case, this is the 20-pin connector for USB 3. I also got a custom cable for that, so I'm not going to use that one. Now I'm going to try to route it through after everything is installed. It shouldn't be too hard, because I don't have any discs behind this card. So, get it in here. That end's plugged in. That end's plugged in, and we have USB 3. So, the only thing left, I didn't plug this fan in either right here. failed to do that too. This fan plugs in just underneath the CPU cooler. And it's an extension I have here because the fan, like I said, these fans don't come with long cables. So I'm going to have to fish this guy out on the other side. All this so I didn't have to take the GPU out. In the future, take the GPU out. But I got it through. I have now connected my fan once I get this white cable plugged into the extension. There we go. And now I just have to close it up. The vented cover panel we'll take more screws to get that guy in. Now, what you'll have when you receive your case is these will already be screwed in, so your screws won't be in a separate baggie. You will have just taken them out, and therefore you'll only need to reuse the screws that were once with it. Just line up the hole and do the same thing you do with fans and other mainboard pieces and components. Is one at a time, gently back it out if you need to. I like to back it out until I find that click. And I know I'm not going to scratch anything. Then you'll do the same thing for the back and the solid panel. The wrong kind of screw. This is 632, but it's just a little different. Okay, so both side panels are on. Next step will be to install the feet if you're standing it up vertically. If it's going to be vertical, your feet have a slot, a key, and there's a keyhole on the top and bottom, the way it's oriented now. And you'll slide that key into the keyhole, and then you use a thumb screw, baggie number 7, 2 thumb screws, 1 per stand, to tighten it down. I like to orient the case with the button at the top if I'm going vertical and the USB at the bottom. Some people like to do it the other way around. Confucius actually being one of them on the small form factor net. But for right now, I'm going to apologize for the closeness of this shot. I can't go back any farther. So here's the keyhole. You'll slide the key in here, move it back, and then the hole will line up to the mount. And then all you'll have to do is insert in the thumb screw, and you will have attached the stand. Thumb screw. Other side. Thumb screw. All right, both stands are installed. And now, if you have the optional handle, I'll go ahead and add that piece in. It has a key as well on both sides. There is a specific way to install it. If you're going to install it on the top, the keyhole is here and here, but if you notice, this keyhole is closer to the rear than this one is to the front. So, if you install the handle the right way, it'll look like this. If you install it the wrong way, these can be kind of tricky to get back out once they're in. If you install it the wrong way, what you'll end up with is overhang on the side. Won't look quite right. And your thumb hole screws, thumb screw holes, I'll get the word out, won't line up either. That'll come in baggie known as baggie 8. And you just screw those, one on the front, one on the back, and we're done. Hope this has been enjoyable. It didn't take too long, and I didn't make too many mistakes. But I'll clean up the cable management and try to get a shot at the end for you with the specs listed again in the description. Thanks a lot for watching.